Did you ever think to yourself about our programs and think, oh, I sure wish we could have so-and-so or such and such come and speak? Well, we have a member that was thinking that I would really like us to have Jack Cashill speak. Now, she could have gotten involved and suggested this to our VP of programs. Instead, she became committed and said, if you have Jack Cashill speak, I will contribute $500 towards the cost of the program. So, their commitment was a large part of our having Jack Cashill tonight. So I'd like you to join me in thanking Yvonne Mock. Yvonne, if you could stand, please. Okay, in no way does this diminish the commitment of our volunteers. This is the whole other level of commitment, a priceless gift of time and energy. At this time, I'd like to introduce one of these volunteers, our Programs Vice President, to introduce tonight's speaker, Mr. Jerry Mungai.
Good evening. Well, did any of you get to see the movie 2016? Yes. Did you like it? Yes. How about the price? What a deal, huh? When we find out when it's going to be shown in our area, we'll put it on our website so that you can get an advance warning about it. Tonight's speaker, Jack Cashill, is a contributor to various websites, including American Thinker and World Net Daily. And he has a nose for scandal or conspiracy, as evidenced by his books on such subjects as the mysterious downing of TWA Flight 800, remember that, during the Clinton years? The mysterious death in Africa of Ron Brown, another Clinton-era person, and of course the secretive life of Barack Hussein Obama, the central character of our national nightmare. Tonight, Jack's going to tell us what the mainstream media won't tell us about Obama and why. Please welcome Jack Cashill.
Since Silicon Valley allegedly invented informality, I'm going to take my jacket off. I didn't dress very formally anyway. Okay, a Muslim, a communist, and a legal immigrant walk into a bar. But you've heard that joke, so I'm not going to tell you. You know the answer. If you don't, we'll tell you later. I was driving down here today. This is the first time I've been to Mountain View, and I was driving down from Pleasanton. I just stopped to visit some friends. And as I was driving down, I passed an attraction that I wasn't aware, I just forgot about. And, oh, damn, okay. But here's what happened to me. Yvonne was there waiting for me. She was early, I was early. And as soon as I get there, I introduce myself and my phone rings. And it's a friend of mine from Kansas City. And I said, you won't believe what I just saw on 880, And the best new attraction in California. And she's trying to guess what it is. I said, no, think a conservative attraction, And this guy blew my punchline. It is Cylindra. Now, you're used to seeing Cylindra, but for those of us from, I live in Kansas City, those of us who come from someplace else, it's really pretty exciting to see it. Anyhow, I'm going to start with the true story. And when I say true story, I don't mean true in the larger sense. And I don't mean the people I'm talking to are composite people that have been compressed to make this story true. This is a true story, and it'll involve a little walking around, so you may not hear everything. Back in the mid-'90s, late '90s, I'm living in Kansas City, and I'm the executive editor of this, I still am, of the region's business magazine, so I have some level of respectability and visibility in Kansas City, which is not hard, by the way, and where everyone's respectable. And one of my neighbors is the editor of the Kansas City Star magazine, whose real name is Art Brisbane, who went on to become the public editor of the New York Times. In fact, he was out here in San Jose for a while with Knight Ridder. And it's February, and so there's no one out walking around. He's walking his dog, I'm just going out for a walk. And I pass him, we start talking, and he looks at my hat. He said, what's with the hat? And my hat says, U.S. Park Police. And some of you know where this is going. And I said, it's my Vince Foster memorial hat. You know? Actually, a friend of mine who lived and worked in Washington gave it to me in honor of Vince Foster. And he said to me, Vince Foster, for the younger people in the audience, is a White House counselor who ended up dead in Fort Morrissey Park under mysterious circumstances. And so he said to me, he said, you're not one of those people who believe Vince Foster was murdered, are you? I said, all right, we're relative peers. I mean, he has a little more status than I do, but we're in a sense peers. And I said to Martin, I've been following this very closely. I said, I've even been to Fort Morrissey Park. And here's all I'm going to tell you, is I don't think he died where they found him. Here's what Art Brisbane did, literally. This is exactly what he said. I'm going to walk away from the mic for a second because it's a show and tell. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. He walked away. That was the end of the conversation. But what for me was the perfect metaphor for the way the media react to news they don't want to hear. Just thinking back, trying to recall when this started, this whole phenomenon. I just read a book, it's like The Final Days of Marilyn Monroe, which was just 50 years ago last weekend. And that's maybe where it did. That is the death of Marilyn Monroe. I don't want to get into that too much. The Kennedys didn't kill her, by the way, but they let her die, basically. And the media simply chose not to investigate. I'm going to jump forward, because it really started kicking in the 90s. Once Bill Clinton was elected, and he was so vulnerable in so many ways, the media had to work overtime to protect him. And, and Vince Foster died in 1993. There's another event that took place in 1993. People under 30 have no idea what it is when you say Waco. That name has been erased from the national consciousness. And here, let me just, if you ever need to convince your fence-sitting friends, forget about your liberal friends, they're useless and hopeless. But we all have fence-sitting friends and relatives. I'm going to talk to you later about how to win them over. But if you ever need to convince them of the artificiality and the unfairness of the media, ask them who died at Waco. Who died at Waco? Now, you're all drawing a mental image of who died, right? And we all have the same mental image, do we not? Skinny, white, angry, gun-toting, God-fearing.
Minority children died.
Minorities. Of the 70, I got all those people spoiling my punchline. I'm going to go beyond that. Of the 74 people who died in Waco on April 19th, 39 were racial minorities. More than half. 26 of them were black. How many black people in America know that? I'd say close to zero. I'd say Al Sharpton doesn't know that. And there's a lot he doesn't know, so it's not it's a low bar for not knowing that. But more than half of the dead in Waco were racial minorities. 26 black, there were 6 Asians and 7 Hispanics. And the media knew that because the FBI gave them video cameras and they recorded themselves. They had all that video imagery. They chose not to share that because they had a president to re-elect. And Waco, had black America known what had happened in Waco, they would have lost black America at that time. That's how well they can conceal the news. The media took a serious turn for the irredeemably bad in November of 1994 with the Gingrich Revolution. I went to my wife's a university professor. Don't say anything. I know she's a moderate Republican. Under my watch, she's become a moderate Republican. And she, so I go to these Christmas parties, and there are a lot of media at this one. And I went to 3 parties, and I overheard 3 separate conversations in one party, in which people there, these were people with either PhDs or work in the media, referred to Newt Gingrich as, you can yell this one out, Hitler, of course, right? They're both statist, vegetarian, anti-smoker, anti-Christians, except, of course, for Newt Gingrich. And they believe that. They were panic-stricken. And they realized that first of all, they realized it was essential that they re-elect Bill Clinton in 1996. And they also realized that was going to take a lot of work. And the Clintons knew that too, because they had they were huge. Bob Dole was beating Bill Clinton in the polls by 20 points in January 95. That's when Hillary called Dick Morris back in and said, do something. And what happened then were the most reckless 2 years, the most corrupt 2 years, except for 2008, in media history. Several major events went unreported or underreported, and I've written books about at least two of them. One is TWA Flight 800, and the other is the death of Ron Brown in Croatia. And those both took place in 1996. For instance, I won't go into the details, just very quickly on the media angle. Ron Brown's plane goes down in Croatia, with 35 people get killed, including the Secretary of Commerce, utterly corrupt Secretary of Commerce, was about ready to turn on his president, Ron Brown. He had a come to Jesus sensation just a few months earlier, was planning on going straight. They couldn't let him. The New York Times had a reporter on board that plane who was killed. The U.S. airport put out a 22-volume report on the crash. I was the first person in the media to request that report. 10 years later. New York Times didn't even bother to request it. And when I did request it, finally, actually 8 years later, my time's a little wrong. The Air Force at first said, I talked to some functionary, and she said, oh, it's going to cost X thousands of dollars, and it'll take X months for us to deliver it, because it's in paper. There's no disk drive copy, and it's in Germany. And I emailed back, I said, that's a little rich for my blood, I'll just work off what I have. And then I got an email immediately from a colonel, said, we're waiving all fees, it'll be there in a week. The Air Force lost 6 of its own people, and had 16 people had their careers destroyed because of it, because they had to take the fall. Those are two incredible stories. I won't go into in detail here, but no, they were out there. Oklahoma City, hugely underreported, misreported also, 1995. Okay, let's jump ahead to 2008, and I have just an unusual experience in 2008, and it begins very innocently. Even though David Maranish recently called me an obsessed conspiratorialist, obsessed with Obama, I do have a real life. I have to make a living. I have jobs to do. In the summer of 2008, I do a lot of collaborative writing. In fact, I'll tell you more about this later, but I was helping Bill Cosby with his book, Come On, People. And Bill Cosby never met me, but they filter it through the publisher. So I had my hands full. I wasn't following the election that closely. And it wasn't until about June of 2008, I found myself stuck in the Detroit airport. And if you've ever been to Detroit airport, it's a big new terminal, now it's Delta, it used to be Northwest. And they have these billboard-sized video screens. And they play CNN all the time, like every single airport in the country does, by the way, one of the most brutal monopolies no one wants to talk about. And they lie about it too, but it is a monopoly and you have no choice but to watch it. I just so happen to be in it, and the Northwest terminal, now it's Delta, there's like these 10 big chambers, and each one has a big screen, and it follows you. And as I was walking through, James Carville just happened to be on. And his head is like this big, bald, gleaming dome. It looked like it came out of Mount Rushmore, it's so big. And he's cackling, and every chamber I walk through, I can't avoid it. It's like something out of 1984. So I duck into a bookstore. And it's like Obama-Rama in the bookstore in Detroit, okay? The city's half black and half Muslim. And it's about 110, that means it's about 120% Obama, So I said, well, I finally break down, I buy Dreams for My Father. And I'm on the airplane. Now, I was a little embarrassed to buy it. So, like I said, I remember in a Woody Allen movie where he's buying a Playboy. And he has to, so I'll have a copy of Nation magazine. It's like, I wanted to buy other things. Some people didn't know I was buying this book. But, and I buy it, and I'm on the plane, I'm reading it, and I'm not a chapter or two, and I said, I do a lot of ghostwriting. I know when a book is ghostwritten. I know. I said, this book is too good, right? So I go back, and I read through the book, highlighting it, and I look up Obama ghostwriter. I'm just curious to see who his ghostwriter was. I wasn't even suspicious at the time. And here's what I read. Unlike John McCain, Barack Obama does not need a ghostwriter. You know, no one questioned his authorship of that book at that point. And now I've reviewed the portfolios in my careers in publishing and advertising of at least 1,000 professional writers, and I didn't find a handful that good. And this is a work of a supposed amateur who at that point in 1995 didn't have the wherewithal to hire a ghostwriter, presumably of that quality. So I just started, you know, and the reason is, part of the philosophy was that Republicans are too stupid to write their own books, but Democrats, like Barack Obama, were a genius. Time magazine called Dreams from My Father the best written book ever produced by an American politician. His genius myth is based on that book. If you remember in 2008, everyone thought he was a genius, and the genius myth derived fully from that one book, Deconstructing Obama. I'm sorry, no, that's my book. I'm getting ahead of myself. Dreams from My Father. So I just started doing a little Googling around, you know, and I wasn't having, I was just Googling key phrases. I wasn't having much success. Then I found a phrase that I can attribute to the person I'm not going to use the real name. I'm going to use the name Tarleton. One was a Sylvia Tarleton, who lived in Colorado, and one was a Bill Tarleton, who lived in New York. And I thought maybe they were like both, but one phrase they each used elsewhere. So I wanted to find out whether they had anything to do with the book, but I can't send an email with my name because they could Google me in a second and they could bust me, and they would never talk to me. But my webmaster, who's in San Francisco, by the way, and uses the San Francisco State email address, made it for a perfect foil. And so I wrote her a little thing to send to Bill Tarleton. Bill, great job on the Obama book, you know. How's Sylvia? You know, I just wanted to see if I could tie them together. And he writes back, who's Sylvia? You know, so, and he goes, as much as I like Obama, I really had nothing to do with the book. And it was totally credible, so I let it drop. And I said, I figured some left-wing poet wrote the book, whatever. September, June goes by, July. You know, I wrote a book, an article in July, who wrote Dreams from My Father, but I let it die. August goes by. In September, I'm doing research on another thread, and I pick up a copy. I just wanted to find out if Bill Ayers, Unrepentant Terrorist, the guy who made Unrepentant a household word, and Barack Obama had hooked up before they got to Chicago. So I figured out that I'll get a Bill Ayers memoir, Fugitive Days, written in 2001, and just read it. And about a third of the way through, I said, bingo, light bulb goes off. And I said, and it was a stupid light bulb, this one, because my first thought was, they're both radicals, they're both in Chicago, same ghostwriter. But as I read more and more about, I read Ayers' book all the way out, I said, no, this guy can really write. And then I go to his website and I find out he defines himself as a writer and editor. He was the writer and editor-in-chief for all the young mischievous radicals in Hyde Park, including Rashid Khalidi, who says in his book, Resurrection of Empire, here's how it starts, here's how the acknowledgement starts. First and foremost, I want to thank Bill Ayers. Now, I'm not going to go into all the detail. I talk about my book, and if you want the short of it, my website, Cashill.com, has my book TV thing on C-SPAN, which I just focused on how I came to the conclusion that Ayers was the author of Dreams from My Father. And so on October 9th, I think it was, I did my first piece ever for American Thinker, whose editor is here in Berkeley, by the way, Thomas Lifson, great guy. And I did a 3,500 word piece because I needed a lot of words to make my case. And that day, Rush Limbaugh picked it up and started talking about it. Now we're 4 weeks out from the election. I've got the October surprise. You know, here I'm my wife is making me rake leaves in Kansas City, and I've got the October surprise. Honey, I'm trying to save Western civilization. She didn't get it, but it's October, leaves are falling. And when Rush Limbaugh talks about you on the air, your life changes. You know, I was at a meeting, and that was a pretty tempestuous fall. I mean, with the economy collapsing, and I'm the editor of a business magazine, and we're having a meeting with, you know, people talking about that sort of thing. But at lunchtime, my voicemail box is full on my cell phone, and first I thought something happened to my kids, but then I realized, yeah, I pick it up. Rush is talking about it, Rush is talking about it, Rush is talking about it, Rush is talking about it. Then I go to my email, Rush. Then, of course, whenever Rush Limbaugh talks about me, he's done it about 4 or 5 times, he always mispronounces my name in a new and different way, so the curmudgeons in the crowd say, well, he may have talked about you, but he mispronounced your name, so you're not a big deal after all. All right, I know that. I live in Kansas City. We don't deceive ourselves. So anyhow, it's October 9th, and I wait for the phone to ring. I said, I got it. I could turn this election around. If I could prove, or I could have someone, even if the National Review or Weekly Standard puts a cover story out, who did Bill Ayers write Dreams from My Father? The election could turn. We're only, 3 or 4 points down, you turn it around. And it reminds me of that Randy Travis song. And sitting there, is it still over, or are we still through? If my phone still ain't ringing, can I assume it still ain't you? Well, the conservative establishment absolutely, totally ran away from this story. Totally. I talk about it in the book, I don't want to go into it here, but I realized then that the respectable conservative media, the Beltway media, the Washington Times, National Review, Human Events, Weekly Standards, Fox, TV, aren't a whole lot better than the mainstream media. Actually, they're better, but they're timid, and they're pusillanimous, and they're cowardly, and they're careerists, and so many of them are more worried about being invited to the next cocktail party in Georgetown than they are about bringing down the president. They had resigned themselves to defeat by October of 2008. So obviously I didn't turn the election around, and Barack Obama was elected. I'm going to jump ahead now to 2011. My book comes out, Deconstructing Obama, in February 2011. My publisher is Simon & Schuster. I'll tell you why this matters. And in the book, I ask 2 basic questions. One is, did Barack Obama write the 2 books that are attributed to him, Dreams from My Father and Audacity of Hope? By the way, in 2008 at a school teacher convention in Virginia, he said, and this is on YouTube, you can see this, he goes, I've written 2 books. School teachers applaud. They're really giddy to be there in the first place, probably playing hooky. And then he says, actually, I wrote mine myself. Oh! Now they laugh, you see, because Republicans are too stupid to write their own books, and they get the joke. He's a genius, Republicans are stupid. They're excited. So it's not like he ever played coy with this. He's been claiming full credit for this from the beginning, both books. And anyone who's read the books carefully knows they're written by 2 different people. Ayers did not write book 2. In fact, Ayers calls it a political hack book, Audacity of Hope, which is accurate in that. So I asked 2 basic questions. First one is pretty obvious. Did Obama write the books attributed to him? The second one, though, I began to get into as the deeper I got into the books, is the story that Barack Obama tells true? And I said, the answer to both questions is the same. No and no. The story is not true in some very fundamental ways. Up until 2011, in the blogosphere, you probably all knew that this story was eroding and falling apart. But the respectable conservative media, including Dinesh D'Souza, we talked about that at dinner, and the major media refused to acknowledge that there was anything wrong with the story told in Dreams from My Father, the biography, the autobiography he tells. And you see, here's how the media work. When Sarah Palin's book, Going Rogue, came out in 2009, which is an excellent book, by the way, and she acknowledges help, virtually all politicians need it, just on the basis of time. The Associated Press alone sent 11 reporters to fact-check Going Rogue. 11 reporters. And they bragged about it. Up until 2012, the major media had collectively assigned 0 reporters to fact-check Dreams from My Father. I mean, it's really astonishing when you think about it. Now, the game changed somewhat in June, actually starting in May of 2012, when David Marinis, he of the Pulitzer Prize winner from the Washington Post, who wrote a book, First in His Class, about Clinton, which won the Pulitzer Prize, overrated, overhyped, self-important, diva out of Washington, comes out with Barack Obama, the story, which is he spent 4 years on. Now, he calls me obsessed. I'm sorry. I wrote about Obama recreationally during those 4 years. And if you recall, the Vanity Fair article came out in May, and it was about the composite girlfriends, And I've been saying all along, these girlfriends are made up. These aren't real people he's talking about. And all of a sudden, I get all the emails. Hey, Jack, you're right all the time. from the insiders in Washington now are emailing me saying they can't support me publicly because they're still fixed to that position, that the story is true, but they want to know the inside dope now, what's true, what's not true. And then in June, Marinus comes out with the second Vanity Fair installment about the Choom Gang, and that is Obama was a big doper in high school. That's no shock there, but that's not the real problem. But when the book comes out in mid-June 2012, as Ben Smith, later a Politico, who's an Obama supporter, now BuzzFeed, reviews the book and says there are 38 instances, at least in this book, in which David Marinus points out significant differences between this real story and the story Obama told in Dreams. Now, James Fry, who wrote A Million Little Pieces, whom Oprah sliced and diced on her show, if you remember, he didn't have 38, he had less than that. But Obama, they were still giving a pass to. Now, David Marinus was in a bind, because once this got out, the left, his audience, his natural audience, the people who were expecting another hagiography of Obama weren't buying the book. And on the right, what we knew, because I started going after Marinus right from the beginning, because the story he told wasn't, it's what he does is he pulls his punches throughout his book. It's not a tell-all biography. It's like half a tell-all biography. I'll get to some of those differences in just a second. As a result, even though we have the same publisher, Simon Schuster, David Marinus, who must have gotten $1 million to $2 million advance on his book and spent 4 years on it, the book tanked quickly. After 4 weeks out, despite publicity that Kim Kardashian would die for, the book was going nowhere. I looked on Amazon, after 4 weeks it was at 1,696 on the Amazon bestseller list. Meanwhile, Edward Klein's book, The Amateur, has anyone read that? Yeah. Okay. That was #1. And it was out a month earlier. And no one in the mainstream media would talk to Klein, even though he himself had been the New York Times editor of the New York Times Magazine. It doesn't matter what your credentials are. If you don't toe that line, you're out. You're not going to get any media exposure at all on the mainstream. I couldn't turn on TV without having David Marinus on. He was on TV more than Michael Phelps was on TV this past week. I mean, he's everywhere. But he had a problem. And that is that once the word got out that this book it pointed out the significant errors in the Obama narrative, his fans, the Obama faithful, didn't want to know. They didn't want to hear it. Didn't want to hear it. So they didn't buy the book. Meanwhile, people like me were saying, that Marinus is pulling his punches in major ways. And so the right wasn't buying the book either, because we knew there was, it was just a half a loaf. So the net result is no one was buying the book. I mean, other than David Marinus's friends and family, which got him to 1696. As someone once said, I was commenting on this, I read an article, and a guy said, good thing you bought the book, Jack, or it wouldn't be under 2,000. And I did buy the book. I didn't get a free copy. Even though, by the way, we have the same publisher, I could not get a free advance copy. They would not let me have it. And I don't blame them. So, now, the book finally proved to be too honest for the left, too dishonest for the right, and the result is a disaster. So what Marinus does 2 weeks ago is he writes this mean-spirited, petty little op-ed for the Washington Post, which is a veiled attack on me. He doesn't mention me by name. I am, in the story, the obsessed conspiratorialist, right? We have the same publisher. One of us has a PhD, and it's not David Marinus. One of us went to Purdue. How many Purdue people here? We got some Purdue people. All right. And he can't bring himself to mention me by name. That's how bad, that's the level of condescension that's in there. And he writes this, it's fairly pathetic op-ed. It got a lot of attention. I mean, multiple thousands of comments. And I, of course, immediately went, to me it was like I woke up on Christmas morning and there was a pony under my tree. I mean, this was such a great treat, just going through it. What I'm going to do now, just quickly, is to highlight some of the sentences, some of Marinus's concerns about people like myself, other obsessed conspiratorialists. And I'm sitting here talking to a room full of obsessed conspiratorialists. I appreciate that. So I'm going to read some things here. I don't like to read too much when I'm speaking, but it's important here. Here's Marinus' quote. The notion that the president was not born in the United States remains at the epicenter of the anti-Obama mythology. That's, he's trying to write us off immediately. Now, what I have over here for sale, by the way, if you're interested, this book just came out last week, is a book I authored with Terry Lakin, Lieutenant Colonel Terry Lakin. Does anyone know Terry? He was a former flight surgeon, U.S. Army 17-year veteran, who challenged Obama's eligibility through the U.S. Army, ended up spending 5 months in the stockade at Fort Leavenworth for his efforts. Now, he may be the single best human being I've ever met. He's a wonderful guy, humble, decent, loving family. He had to leave all this behind to do what he did. He's also one of the most courageous people I know, soft-spoken. But when he gets to prison, the prison psychologist says to him, I know why you're here. You think Obama was born in Kenya, don't you? And you don't think he's eligible to be president, do you? And what Terry Lakin said is the position that all serious birthers have said, including Joseph Farah, as the publisher, WND, World Net Daily, for which I write, and Jerry Corsi also who writes for them. And what Terry said is, the problem is, I don't know where he was born, and I don't know if he is eligible. That's the birther position. Now, the only person I know who said that Barack Obama was born in Kenya, the only prominent person, you know who that is? Barack Obama, right? The original birther. In his 1991 promotional brochure, published by Acton and Distal, the agency that represented him, the literary agency, there it is. Born in Kenya. Then, when this came out about a month or so ago, they tried to cover it by saying, oh, this was an error, right? I mean, can you imagine? I can see an error saying, he was born in, you say he was born in Maui when he was born in Honolulu. You don't make an error saying, this guy was born in Kenya? How do you make that up? You know, the K isn't next to the America on the, it's like a Chinese typewriter and everything. No, you can't make that up. Anyhow, but personally, I think Obama was lying when he said he was born in Kenya. He has that habit. Now, I've looked at this as closely as anyone. I don't know where he was born. Although I do know this, and I'll talk a little bit more in a second, and we'll do it in the Q&A, is that the first time anyone saw him, who's still around to talk about it, was in Seattle, Washington. Now, the left doesn't know this, and I'll talk more about this in a minute. Okay, here's another Marinus thing. Finally, he's putting the nail here. He thinks he's putting the nail in the birther coffin. Finally, the name of Obama's mother, Stanley Ann, was unusual enough that doctors and nurses in Honolulu remembered it, and her giving birth. Right? That's the thing. Here's what he does. Marinus spends 4 years on this project. He's not the only one. I'm going to give you some other examples. The woman who wrote, Janie Scott, New York Times, wrote the book about a singular woman about Barack Obama's mother, Stanley Ann Dunham. Sally Jacobs, Boston Globe, wrote a book called The Other Barack, about the father. David Remnick, New Yorker editor, wrote The Bridge, about Obama. 4 prominent authors spent major resources on this story. Not a single one of them can tell us a single word about where Ann Dunham was from the time she left University of Hawaii in January of 1961 until the baby was born. They don't even try. What's worse is they don't try to explain why we have zero information about that. Zero information. Marinus adds zero information to that pool of information. As to the wedding itself, they all make up like just so stories. Oh, they jetted off to Maui. Blah, blah, blah. They don't know. There's no wedding license. There's no pictures. There's no pictures of a pregnant Ann Dunham. There's no pictures of a baby Barack Obama. They don't know. But they shield their ignorance by attacking people who are at least trying to get at the truth. Now, here's what's pathetic. Marinus did not talk to a single person who attended the birth of Barack Obama. He did not tell us how she got to the hospital, where she was the previous 6 months, how she got home from the hospital, where she went when she got home. He's writing a book. The birth is central to the story. Same thing with Jamie Scott, who wrote the book about the mother. Not a word about any of this. And then he tells in his book a story, and here's the story he tells that he thinks disproves any birther conspiracy. He tells the story of a woman, a school teacher, who sometime after the birth of Barack Obama was having lunch at the Outrigger Club. You can even name the place, what they were looking at, how it was designed. And she's talking to a doctor. And the doctor says to her, well, you know what, I heard some scuttlebutt around that someone named Stanley gave birth. Now, 50 years later, this woman puts 2 and 2 together, 45 years later, and says, oh, that must prove that Stanley Ann Dunham had the baby at the hospital. Now, Marinus interviews this woman and tells the story, except that she was telling the story 4 years ago, and when she was telling the story 4 years ago, it was the doctor who delivered the baby who was telling her the story. Now it's just some doctor who told her, because Marinus probably figured out the real doctor had died by the time that this story could have been told. As I wrote, how did this pass the editors? I mean, this is not, and he's making fun of birthers? This is junk, anyhow. In tandem with the birther notion comes the idea that Obama is a secret Muslim. His espoused Christianity must be a cover-up. That's what Marinus writes about us. And I don't know whether he's Muslim or not. Obama, we know that but we do know this, he's a fellow traveler in the world of Islam. And we also know this, that his Christianity is a sham. He joined Jeremiah Wright's church, which is only marginally Christian and not a way to be proud of, because of 2 reasons. One is his own, to firm up his own shaky identity as an African American, and secondly, because there's a huge base of votes, and he's very politically ambitious. What Marinus doesn't cover at all in his book is the fabulous conversion scene in Barack Obama and Dream from My Father, which is right in the time frame that Marinus is writing about. He doesn't mention it at all.